A wise Roman statesman named Cicero said it very tersely a long time ago. The more laws, the less justice. And what we have in America, and particularly at the federal level, is far too many laws for there to be justice. Now, I am not a believer in the philosophy of so-called objectivism and Ayn Rand. However, she wasn't dumb, and she has a quote that applies to this. She said, "There's no way to rule innocent men. The only power any government has is to crack down on criminals." Well, when there aren't enough criminals, one makes them. One declares so many things to be a crime that it becomes impossible for men to live without breaking laws. There was a writer named Harvey Silverglate, and about a dozen years ago, he wrote a book called 3 Felonies a Day. 3 Felonies a Day, How the Feds Target the Innocent. And the Amazon page that has the introduction to this book says that the average professional in this country wakes up in the morning, goes to work, comes home, eats dinner, and then goes to sleep, unaware that they've likely committed several federal crimes that day. Why? The answer lies in the very nature of modern federal criminal laws, which have exploded in number and also become impossibly broad and vague. In 3 Felonies a Day, Harvey A. Silverglate reveals how federal criminal laws have become dangerously disconnected from the English common law tradition, and how prosecutors can pin arguable federal crimes on any one of us for even the most seemingly innocuous behavior. The volume of federal crimes in recent decades has increased well beyond the statute books and into the morass of the Code of Federal Regulations, handling federal prosecutors an additional trove of vague and exceedingly complex and technical prohibitions to stick on the hapless targets. Now, they go on to say that it doesn't just apply to the professional and political class. It could well be expanded to all of us. But the point remains, they are doing exactly what Ayn Rand said that a state would do when it sought power over people. They just multiply the laws until everybody is a criminal. Now, I'm going to come back to that, but let's take a little trip down memory lane and see where all this started. This is from James Madison, founding father, good guy in my opinion. And he wrote this in the Federalist number 45. And though I think he was a good guy, he was so wrong here. I mean, this would almost be like comedy hour, like a joke, as far as what he is saying. This is what you'll get if you ratify the proposed Constitution as compared to what we have now. The differences are just so stunning. It kind of makes you want to laugh, except that it's really not funny. It's so serious. But he starts by saying, "The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite." So, is that the government we have now? I think it's the reverse now. The powers left of the states are few and defined, and the powers the feds have managed to grab for themselves are numerous and indefinite. And so it's sort of the opposite of the government we were promised when we ratified the Constitution. And he goes on, he says, "The former, that is the federal powers, will be exercised principally on external objects, as war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce, with which last the power of taxation will for the most part be connected." It doesn't sound like James Madison was counting on a federal individual income tax. He thought maybe we just have tariffs on foreign commerce, and that would fund our federal government. But again, if you have an individual income tax, that lets you do what Ayn Rand said and what was warned about in 3 Felonies a Day. There's just so many laws you have to comply with that everybody's guilty. Tax law is an excellent example of that. The federal government, even if they didn't need our individual income taxes to provide financing. They want individual income taxes because then everybody's worried about cheating on their taxes. And the tax laws are so complicated. If you have a complicated life, you never really know. So he didn't understand also, this next sentence really makes me clear, he didn't understand one other thing about what the federal government would do. It's not the federal government, it's defective personalities, it's centralizers, it's people who really get off on bossing other people around. And they are willing to make all kinds of compromises to get more power for themselves and to draw it together into one place. He says, the powers reserved to the several states will extend to all objects which, in the ordinary course of affairs, concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people, and the internal order improvement, the prosperity of the state. You see, he thought the state would have the main role in regulating the lives of the citizens within the country, and the federal government would deal with things at the borders and foreign policy and what have you. And now we find that no, they're both in our business all the time. The operations of the federal government will be most extensive and important in times of war and danger. Those of the state government in times of peace and security. Do you see what they've done, folks? They've simply put us in eternal war. Another Roman statesman, actually it may have been Cicero as well, said war is the health of the state. And they knew this. They've just kept us in a state of... If Madison says the federal government will only be more important in times of war, well, guess what? They've just kept us in war. They want eternal war, the feds do, because it magnifies the powers of the federal government. Oh, you can't limit us now. This is an emergency. America's under attack. We've got a war on terror. How can you have a winnable war on a tactic? You can't. It's like having a war on combined arms assault. Not only that, they have internal wars too. Wars on drugs, wars on poverty, wars on, I guess it's going to be hate and discrimination as defined by them pretty soon. Listen to this next sentence. As the former periods will probably bear a small proportion to the latter, state governments will here enjoy another advantage over the federal government. In other words, he's saying we're going to be at peace more than we're going to be at war, so the states will have the upper hand most of the time. Little did he know how grasping and how power mad the people that have accumulated around D.C. would be, that they will simply put us in eternal war so that their power is magnified. So I think that's the history. That's where we are in the history. We have not got the government we were promised when this Constitution was ratified. It has been by degrees turned around completely on us. And the policies laid out in localism are designed specifically to undo that. But I digress. I just wanted you to see where we come from. And now I want to tie it together and see what this means. Let's tie this all together. We have a central government which has expanded its own powers to make every professional person, every person whose life is the least bit complex. In other words, all but the poorest and most simple of us that pose no threat to the system. They have created a way for all of us to be criminals. And when you do that, what do you have to do? I mean, you either lock everybody in a cage or you prosecute selectively. You prosecute selectively. You have whenever there's so many numerous laws and the laws are vague, you have to prosecute selectively. Even if you don't want to, you do it. But in this case, they want to do it. I mean, the fair-minded observers across this country and the world will understand that people who are in the club, who are sort of establishment players high enough, they never seem to do up any jail time. They don't seem to get prosecuted. You know, you might have a dog and pony show with the commission. I saw it today. I saw Representative Gatz asking John Durham, well, here's the guy that's at the center of this scandal you were tasked to investigate. Did you ever go interview them? Oh, no, we couldn't find them. But if there's somebody they really want to find, they'll hunt them to the ends of the earth. I think we see that sweetheart deals getting cut even when people on one side of the equation are obviously guilty of massive crimes. Somehow they never get prosecuted. Somehow they never do a day of jail time. But people on the other side break some arcane, broad, vague law, and they may really have broken the law. But it doesn't matter because everyone's broken some of those laws. If you live a complicated enough life, you'll overlook something. You'll not fill out a piece of paper correctly. You will misunderstand the instructions on that tax form. You will take something home from the office you shouldn't have taken, and without even understanding its significance. And so everybody is guilty. Now, some people have called this a two-tiered justice system, where one side of the political divide, the higher ups in that, they look the other way. The system doesn't prosecute them even when they're obviously guilty of serious crimes. The other side, not all of them, but the ones who really cause trouble to the system, the full force of the federal government comes down on them. They prosecute them to the end. They find laws that people didn't understand. Maybe no one's been prosecuted on it for decades, and suddenly it's a big deal, and now they just have to prosecute, and they stand up piously and say, they've broken the law. Yeah, we've all broken the law, and you've selectively chosen to prosecute them, not because their crimes are worse, but because they are a bigger threat to your system. So then what this means is we're all political prisoners, basically. Or at least the people that get selectively prosecuted because they're a threat to the establishment on one of these hundreds of arcane, broad, vague federal laws and regulations, they are essentially a political prosecution. If they're convicted on those crimes, the guys who run our system today are smarter than the guys who ran the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union would put some kind of political charge on them, slandering the state or something like that. These guys don't do that. They're not honest enough to do that. They'll come up with some charge for breaking one of their vague laws, and they'll convict them of that. They'll never say, oh, we are putting you in prison because you're embarrassing the state with your whistleblower revelations. They will charge them with something else, but it's still making them a political prisoner. Our system just isn't honest enough to call it that. And this other question of a two-tiered justice system, America doesn't have a two-tiered justice system. If it's two-tiered, it isn't justice. It can't be. It isn't a justice system anymore. It's a control system. America, at this point in time, does not have, the federal government doesn't have a Justice Department. They just call it that. Just like they are keeping professional people in line with all these vague laws, and you never know whether you're guilty or not, so you better shut up and not cause the system problems. So you have this, on paper, you may have the right to free speech. If you try to use it, we'll selectively prosecute you for one of these laws that you didn't know you broke. So they don't call those people political prisoners. In the same way, their oppression machinery, the machinery by which they oppress citizens and scare them into not using their free speech rights against this idiocy and madness, they call it a justice system, but that's not a justice system. It's not designed to produce justice. It's designed to oppress dissent and keep people in line. So it's an oppression system when it's two-tiered. And we have to decide what we're going to do about that. And obviously, I don't advocate violence. I don't advocate working within the system either. But I've written 2 books about that and how we should deal with it. But the point is, we need to deal with it. We need to face what is. The federal government doesn't have a Justice Department. It's got an oppression department. We have people that any one of us at any time could be political prisoners due to the actions of these people that in their heads they think they're doing the right thing. And they're not. They're doing the wrong thing. Thank you so much for your time.